Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 2, page 1176. 1176. And we discussed Daas. We're talking about Daas, what he's called hiskashrus and hischabrus, connection, attachment. And as a moyach goes, as far as intellectual level of Das, is hakara and hargosha, which loosely translated is recognition and feeling. Essentially the internalization and the personalization of any concept and idea. So first he spoke about it in general context of human faculties, of intellectual faculties, and then moved it to Avodah, and Avodah, the service, Avodah Hashem, that Das is the primary work, because that's what causes a Hergesh Pnimi of Elokus, an internal feeling for the divine. So you can contemplate on godliness, and you can understand it very well. He made it very clear. Bina creates total clarity and understanding, but it's not yet you. It's not yours. You don't own it. You don't feel that it's mine, the extent that I'm connected with it. And that's what Das introduces. He explained, Das lekeavich, that commandment, Da, is not about yediyah and hasaga, not about knowing and understanding, because that requires learning. That requires education and learning about it. So what does Da mean? He says, Da, hakavana be'emre Da, hu b'chinas ha'korav ha'gosha, the recognition that you identify with it. That's a good word, identify and feel. That this inyan eliki, whatever it is that you were taught in Chachma Bina, it becomes in a state of you identify and feel it. Okay. And he said clearly the hakara does not come. Etzem inyan hakara, in the parentheses, ein shaykh b'zel limud. About bina is limud, is learning, understanding, comprehending, and all that comes with that. Mastering the idea. Das is connecting to the idea. The hakara and hargosha that he's talking about. Okay. That the Aveda should be an Aveda mitis. Okay, so the next step is calling it Aveda mitis now. So before he said it's the primary Aveda, because it causes it to internalize inside of you. Now he's calling Aveda mitis, which he's going to explain. Amitis means it's not passing, it's not fleeting. It really lasts and really becomes part and parcel of you, the human being. So he says like this, I'm just reviewing what we learned. We see Sedus Ava Yira Belev, which comes when you have an awakening. Now he's talking about actual emotions. The emotion is the actual feeling of it. Now we're talking about that the mind says this is mine and connected to me, and my mind's telling me that I should feel it. But the actual feeling is expressed in the emotions. So Das is going to learn is the bridge, because it takes an abstract idea, an academic idea, a theory that you can understand very well. It personalizes it, and then it turns it into emotions, feelings, direct feelings toward it. So what does he say? So he says that he says through comprehension and contemplation alone, it will not be true. What he means by truth doesn't mean that it doesn't have any truth to it. It means lasting, permanent, that has something that really is not just an inspiration that dissipates. And there he goes now and quotes the Tanya. So let's sum up the Tanya we learned. I'm reading now in the middle of page 1176 and just summing up what we learned. So he said, what's the Tanya? The Tanya, the end of chapter 3, in the first section of Tanya, when he speaks about Chachma and Bina, in the middle of the chapter, about contemplating about the greatness of God, Mamal Kalam, Sevav Kalam, and Kulu Kamek Kala Chashiv. That's contemplation. You understand the godliness that relates to existence, the godliness above existence, even what we're learning here. Daas Tachton, Das Elyon, All that's bina, developing the Nakud of Chachma. Das, when it moves into another paradigm, it's about me now. It's not just about the Inyan. It's applying to me. Not about me as in I understand. Now that this is mine, it's my father. Like the story with which is actually a mashal from the Rashbats, one of the great Chassidim, time of the Rebbe Marash, Rebbe Rashab, the Rashbats, who gave that mashal, the letter that I said, where the person who couldn't read, his father had passed away, and it was conveyed in a letter. The one who read understood and read it, and yet it didn't have an impact. And the one who fainted, it did have the impact. He fainted. And he said, why? Because it's my tata. It's my father. The person who read it was not his, didn't belong to him. So that's to use that example for Das. It's mine. It relates to me. It's about identify with it. It's connected to me. So he says the words, I'll just read inside from the Tanya. Shemekasher, this is what Das accomplishes. Shemekasher daiti bekesher amitz v'chazik. That he binds his mind in a strong and powerful bond. Ki af mishu chachem v'novin b'gedulas ein sei baruch hu. Even though he may be a person, even someone who's a chacham, knows he has the chachma, the nekuda, the awareness, and the hasaga of bina, novin. B'gedulas ein sei baruch hu, hine im lo yikasher daite, if he does not bind himself to it, bind his mind to it. Is das lo yeled benafshe yira v'ava amitis. If he does not do so, true awe and love will not be born and not be birthed from this contemplation. Ki'im dimyein shav. It'll only be illusory, which is a word for like a dimyein shav means wasted or meaningless illusions. It's a pretty strong word. Obviously, the Alter Rebbe is referring to what it should be. So he's not suggesting it's nothing at all, but it's not the Ava V'yira that's supposed to come of it. Is a Demyein Shav. It's something that's just fleeting. Valkein Hadasu Kiyam Hamidus. And then he concludes there, that's why Das is the Kiyam Hamidus. That means it sustains it. Make sure that the Midas are permanent and remain. So when someone, let's say he's inspired by Fabrengen and says, oh, now I love it and so on. We all know that can pass very quickly. Next morning, you'll say, remember last night? You say, yeah, but I moved on. That's a perfect example. Never became Das. So definitely did not remain any Kiyam Hamidus of Ava V'yira. Whereas if a person really applies themselves and connects with it, which requires real work and effort, that then will be the Kiyum and the perpetuation sustain the Midas. I just want to mention, because I said it yesterday, it was after the recording, that it just brought to mind what the Mittel Rebbe writes in the beginning of Kuntus Hispilus. So one of the Kuntresim of the Mittel Rebbe, so I read yesterday, that he said that Kol Ika Magmose, the Alter Rebbe's, the primary objective, Magmose is more than that, what he yearned for, what he intended, his primary what he intended. And he goes on to say, "Who betchilas avedose bekedesh ashalei pam lepam v'shtayim shamaiti mipiruach kotzezal." Not once, not twice, that I heard from my father, meaning from Alter Rebbe. Shekol ikar magmose, says it a second time, v'yigiyose. His primary yearning for, his primary objective, what would you say? Magmose is a stronger word. Magmose. Sein ganze. It's like when we say his entire mission, entire goal was to bring Mashiach. So Kol Ikar Magmose V'yigiyose, and his effort. The Mesiras Nefesh Mamish Alanash, an effort with Mesiras Nefesh Mamish. It's strong words here for Anash, meaning for his Chassidim. Rak Sheyukva Benafsham is only that should be embedded in their spirit. Gili Elikus, the revelation of divine Gili, the revelation, the revealed godliness. V'hainu sheyi ispilus nafshem rak ispilus alikis, that the excitement, the enthusiasm in their soul, their spirit, should be only Ispailus Alikis, divine excitement. V'lo Ispailus Chaye Basar, and not excitement over Chaye Basar, over physical, material life. She'en Ispailus Alikis Klal, which is not at all divine excitement or stimulation, if you wish. I see Rabbi will write something here. Please. Okay. Just wanted to bring that into the picture. So that's where we're up to. And now we can continue. Unless someone has a question or comment, I'll be happy to continue. No? Okay, good. So now we continue from the line, middle of the page, a little below the middle of the page. The line begins amitis, ki'im, dimyein shav. So it says, v'chein hu, the Rebbe Rashab continues. What we just said in Tanya, chapter 3. By the way, I did look up the Tanya. I didn't see an explanation of the difference between omitz and chazak. And I'm sure you can find some explanation, but I didn't see it, at least my initial look. Okay. He says, "V'cheinu ba'ageres hakedesh simen tezvav," and the same idea is also in Ageres hakedesh, which is of course the fourth section in Tanya, the section 15, simen tezvav. So he quotes from there, similar to what it says in Perek Gimel. The Bekulan is referring to in all these Aveda of Chachma Bina of the Spheres, in all of them you need to have enclosed Das. In other words, you need Das inserted and involved in the process. What is Das? Das is the level of the Iskashus HaNefesh, that the spirit, your spirit, is getting attached and connected to the thing that you are learning or studying or understanding. This is all quoted from Ageres HaKedesh. He's just quoting the select words he wants, so it's not the whole quote, but you see the chulus means that he's quoting pieces. So what does he say? In this contemplation, in this comprehension, I should say. In this asog, you need das, which creates the iskashus. Shememena noildaba is a midah mehamidus. From it, from das, will be given birth one of the different midas. Meza midah mehamidus means there are different midas. There's chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach, chayd, yisod. So he said, this is kashrus. That's inserted. That's the hasaga, the comprehension, is dressed up in, creates, from this will be born a midah. V'hainu. So it's essentially the same theme and the same point that he says at the end of chapter 3. So again, the thoroughness, the Rebbe Rashab is just bringing the complete picture. So two places in Tanya where you see the importance of das as iskashus, of bringing it into your being, into your self. I'm going to elaborate a few minutes more about this, but let me just continue. V'hainu, shaydei hadas dafke. This means that dafke through das, this level of concentration and focus and what we call identifying with and internalizing the idea, nimshach ha'er v'agili belev. The gili, the revelation, that the heart should be awake and consciously feeling the divine, the oir, that's drawn through das. So das draws it into, in a revealed way, your heart is beating, is feeling this experience. Lias hisaris alev amiti bebchinis ava v'yira. To the effect of it having a true stimulation of the heart, a true awakening or arousal of the heart in the state of ava v'yira, love and awe. Amitis, because of the das. So take away das, you have basically an abstract. When I say abstract, I don't mean abstract as afshot, I mean removed from you a academic idea, a beautiful idea, a great idea. You understand it. Al-Buryov, he said, well, you understand it really solidly well, but there's no personal connection. So let me explain this a bit more, just to make it a little broader and be understand. In Tanya Perik Tes, the Alter Rebbe says that the Nefesh Elikis resides in the moyach, shaba, in the mind, in the objective and reflective mind. The Nefesh Bamis resides in the left side of the heart, where there's blood, where the blood is produced, passion, and that means in the impulses of the heart. So essentially, the battle between divine soul and animal soul is like the battle between the mind and the heart. The heart gets stimulated and tempted or seduced by something, let's say in this world, whether it's a taivas heter or taivas isur, a desire that's permitted or not permitted. And if there's no mind to check it, you just act on it. That's what impulsive means. Even with the mind, we often act on it. Okay, comes the mind, which carries the Nefesh Elikis, and says, no, let's reflect on this. Is this appropriate? Basically, the intelligent human being applying moyach shalta al lev, like he'll say later in Perikid Beis, in Tanya, self-control. You don't just follow every temptation you have. You don't just follow your heart. So the mind reflects. Reflection means, let's look at it. Is it appropriate? Is it not appropriate? Will it be destructive? Won't it be destructive? Most mistakes we make, we know, is because it's impulsive, and we don't load the mind even to speak about it. So by the time the mind has something to say, you already did it. So what do you see from that? That in this case, when I'm describing, the moyach is a very powerful force because it's objective. So in that case, moyach has a power over the heart. But there's the other side to the coin. Imagine a person only has a mind and no emotions. That's like a detached person, cerebral, and they don't feel, whatever reason. And that could also be in personal relationships with others, and it could also be with God. So the other side of the coin is that once you know that this is the right thing, the moyach says, yes, this is appropriate, because I'm contemplating on godliness. We're not talking about a taiva coming from the heart now. So now you want the other way around. You want the moyach to impact the heart. You want to feel it. You don't want to just know it and be aware of it. You want it to become part of your subjective experience. So now subjectivity actually takes on a positive side. It's subjectivity, if it's not driven by the right direction and not guided, can take you who knows where. But subjectivity driven and coming from the right place is exactly what you want. Then you personalize. If someone says, you know what, I'm moyach shalta alev, and I only stick to my mind, I don't let my heart affect me. That's not positive when it comes to v'haftas Hashem lekecha. Where there you want it b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafsh, b'chol meidecha, you want it in ava v'yira. So that's where das comes in. Das carries that it doesn't just remain an idea, a nice idea, but you actually say, this is my idea, this is mine. I feel it, I want it in my life. And that will give birth to middas of ava v'yira that are sustainable because it's coming through that process. So I just wanted to put that into context. So basically the goal here is to bring the objective into the subjective. Usually we read about the opposite way, not to let subjectivity affect your mind. Here you want the mind to affect your subjectivity, that your personal interests should be aligned with God's interests. Not just in your mind as an idea, but you're actually completely are consumed and feel it in the fullest sense of the word. Now, it's obvious that there are many levels to this. Not one das is not necessarily comparable to another das. One person's das is not comparable to another person, but this is an Aveda. This is Aveda. Now, yesterday the question was asked, how do you do it then? If it's not comes through limud, if it doesn't come through training and education, how do you do it? So it's a good question. It's basically all of Chassidus. Chassidus says that when you learn properly, and then you learn to appreciate what you're learning, not just about godliness. So this can be through a combination of Kabbalah sale, or combination of true appreciation. You learn about Elokus, and that it's something eternal, and we are mere mortal human beings, and we have the ability to connect to godliness, and therefore to connect to immortality, and make it part of our lives. When we learn that this is the mission for which the neshama comes down, my neshama, not just the concept. So these are exercises. They're not necessarily you don't teach someone to be committed, but you teach them the importance of commitment. And then there has to come that willpower to want to connect. You have to appreciate it to that point. So I would say a proper chacham and bina, unless there's an impediment, or you're lazy, or some other reason the Yetzer Hara gets in the way, should lead to someone's das. Because now, if it's so valuable, why don't you see the value for your own life? Why is it just a concept? Why is it just a detached concept? But this is an Aveda. That's Aveda. That's what he said. The Ikar Aveda is das, is to create iskashus. In other words, the Igiyah that we have in learning about something and understanding it is not comparable to the Aveda of das when you connect with it, which is, of course, a whole different dimension as he's discussing here. But the truth is, maybe he will talk about more of how you achieve this level of das. Right now, we just discuss what das is, not so much how you get there, just that what it is. That's what we've learned so far. So, if anybody has any question, if not, I'll just continue. Okay, good. So now we continue. So now we've discussed das and nefesh, how you bring the gili alakus in your spirit, in your soul, through das that takes an idea, personalizes it, internalizes it, and ultimately gives birth to a real feeling for it, real love and connection to it. You know, I was just thinking, sometimes we use the expression, you hear something, you say, it's not speaking to me. You know, what you're saying is not speaking to me. People say that. In other words, what you're saying makes sense, it's fine, but it's not touching me in a place that you could say, I buy into it. I think that may be also, I mean, I'm not talking about in a superficial way. Someone says, it's not speaking to me, you know, like, let's go out to a certain restaurant. Someone says, it's not speaking to me. Obviously, that's quite superficial. But I mean something on a deeper level. And that doesn't mean it can't speak to you. It just means right now what you said did not speak to me. It doesn't hit me in the right place. And it may not be as a result of your own resistance. It could be a result because either wasn't communicated correctly or didn't yet. It needs to percolate and marinate some more until it becomes part of who you are. But I just thought that expression may also be helpful here. To say something not speaking to me. That again, does not mean you negate. You're not saying I disagree with you. You're not saying I don't understand what you're saying. You're saying it doesn't speak to me. It's not me. It's not me. It's you. You know, you want to do it, go ahead and do it. I believe in you, but I am not. I didn't buy in yet. I'm not in yet into it. Yeah. So now he moves from nefesh to elam. We'll see what that means. I'm not sure what that means. He says, "But commercial nefesh, like it is in the spirit and the das and the nefesh."
Which line is it?
Elam. You want to say something?
What line are we in? I lost the place.
The last line I just learned. The line begins nimshach, and then the next line is shehu benefesh. Like 2/3 of the way, around 2/3 of the way down.
I got it. Thanks.
U'kamoishu benefesh kenu be'elam. As it is in the nefesh, I guess well, not I guess. It means he just spoke about the gili benefesh. The same thing is be'elam in the world. The kamoisha gili er benefesh wa'idei das tachton. Just as we just said that the gili er, meaning the gili er aleki, that came through bina, through understanding. So its gili is dafke through das. Das is the channel that brings it alive inside of you. Kamoi kain, aidei das mamshech gili er be'elam. Oh, okay. It simply means that till now we were talking on the personal level of the elokus, the godliness within you. Now he's saying Das also affects the world around us. It brings the Gilia Lakus Be'elam in the world. So what he's going back now to the beginning of the paragraph in the last page. Remember, it all started with Das Elyon, Das Tachton in Elikus, and now we have to find it in the Adam. And he said that's Yichud Ilah and Yichud Tata, the Yichud of Havai and Elikim. So now he's broadening it when we talk about revealing godliness in the world, not just revealing godliness within yourself. He says also Das plays that prominent role as the bridge that brings godliness into the world. That's what he's broadening now, the topic, which was really much more what we've been discussing over the last pages. We've been talking Das and Das Tachton in a large context, whether it's the perspective from above that Elikus, Yesh Amiti is the real Yesh, reality, and existence is all, and the and existence is all Ayin, or the other way around, that existence, you go from the bottom up, existence, and you get to the Ayin Eliki, the divine energy within existence. That was all talking about existence. So now he's going back to that. After explaining Das in the personal way, which we just learned, how you internalize it, he's saying the same thing. Das does the same as we bring Elikus into the world. There too, you could bring it in the world in a way that's just passing and fleeting, or in a way that, well, you know, Dira B'Tachtenim, you want to make that it permeates existence. And that ultimately, V'niglik Kved Hashem V'ro Kol Basar Yagdav, that the world itself internalizes godliness. So now he's going to discuss that. Das in the context of how you reveal godliness in the world and in an internal way. So he says like this. For who, this Gilia Er Be'elam, for who hayichud havaya ve'elikim. This, in the words of Torah, of Kabbalah, of Chassidus, is the yichud, the unity between Shem Havaya and Elikim, the two dimensions of godliness, Havaya and Elikim. Lies gili Shem Havaya be'elam, with the goal, the purpose, and the lias that it should cause the revelation of Havaya in Elam. So let me just define Havaya and Elikim. Remember, we learned Elikim is Gematria HaTeva. Elikim is godliness as it relates to Mamala Kalam and as it relates to existence. So in other words, it's a diminished and not as revealed because you need existence to exist. You don't want to blow its circuits. So the Elikus has to come in a diminished form, meaning in a more concealed state. So Elikim right now is the force that creates Teva. So Teva conceals the energy within it. It's there. Elikim is there, like you learn Tanya. Shem is Shemogan, Hashem Elikim. Hashem is the Gili Elikus. Elikim is the Mogan, not the sun, the sheath, that allows the flow to be seen and be experienced by existence. Elikim is Midas HaTzimtzum, basically. And Havai is Midas HaGilui, Chesed and Gvura, as he explains in Tanya. So he says, when you're talking about connecting, revealing godliness in the world, that's the yichud of Havaya, the Gilui, that is unfiltered and not diminished with Elikim. If you only had Havaya, the existence couldn't receive it. If you only have Elikim, it's in a state of concealment. So you need the yichud of Havaya and Elikim, which is why we say all the time, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu, Havaya Elokeinu. You always have yichud, Havaya Hu Elikim. We say 7 times in Yom Kippur, and many other times throughout the year in different forms and expressions. Anoichi, Havaya Elekecha. So throughout the Torah, you're always going to find Havaya and Elikim, Havaya Hu Elikim. Basically, that they're connected. Now, remember in the pasuk, V'yadaita Ayin v'shavesel levecha ki Havaya Hu Elikim. That Havaya is Elikim. So it all goes back to that verse in Veschanon. So what does it mean in simple English? It means divine revelation on God's terms, enclosed in a way that we can also experience it. Now we're going to learn there's 2 ways this yichud happens. Das Tachton, Das Elyon. But right now, he's calling it Yichud Havaya Elokim. This is going to be very important as we continue the discussion. Now, good. So this is what Das does in the human being, connects a lakus that you can understand and contemplate on. And Bina, Das connects it to you internally. The same thing, Das connects the divine reality, the divine awareness, the divine consciousness and Gilui to existence. And that's Havaya into Elokim. So Das basically connects Havaya and Elokim. Okay. Now comes a parenthesis. Let me just see. This is not a short. Let me see. This parentheses goes. Where does it end?
What, 5 lines from the bottom?
No, that's a second parenthesis. No, it ends. Yeah, it ends 3 lines on the top of the next page. So it's a long parenthesis. I'm just wondering whether it will help us. Okay, after the parentheses, he's going to say this is the work of the neshamas to draw Elokus into the worlds, which is the whole theme, of course, of the purpose of creation. But let's learn the parentheses, and then I'll make sure that we have the flow correct from before the parentheses and after. Remember, parentheses sometimes is just short and just clarify something, but sometimes a parentheses takes a life of its own. That's why I'm always careful. I don't want to go into parentheses and then it confuses the whole flow. So let's learn the parentheses, and which has a bunch of parentheses within it. So it's a parentheses within parentheses. And then we'll go back.
Said this, we were on a parentheses that last few hundred pages is one.
Yeah, that's another parentheses. That's correct. Good point. Very good point. We are in a long parentheses that will end in volume 3. And obviously then we're going to go back and see also what was before and after. But that's a parentheses. That's the whole, like that, you could say that 550 pages of parentheses is more than hundreds of Maimarim all in one parentheses. Can you imagine? I don't know, hundreds of Maimarim, but definitely a good 100 Maimarim. Okay, so now parentheses. That's coming to explain a bit what we just said. Vihine. Now, whenever there's a vihine, you could rest assured it's like not say a beginning of a new idea, but it's definitely more than just a like a short qualification. So he says like it's vihine, the Rebbe Rashab, in the parentheses, Das Tachton Lamaila. Das Tachton in Lamaila, he means in Elokus, not in our Avodah. Shu ba'ayin shalei yesha nivra. So we know Das Tachton Lamaila is what? Is the awareness, the perspective in the ayin of the yesh ha-nivra. Right? Because it's the godliness that relates to and engages with the yesh. It's concealed in the yesh. That's Das Tachton. Das Elyon is the ayin of yesh amiti. So he's saying now, this Das Tachton Lamaila, which is in the ayin, in the godliness, why is it called ayin? Because it's not of the same substance as the yesh, and it's not understood by us. So that ayin, the yesh ha-nivra, harizeh his almus ha'er, that's a concealment of divine light, Lislabish be'elamis. That's very clear. The ayin of the yesh amiti, the ayin amiti, is not mislabish and elamis. Remember, we learned it's removed from existence. It's not even how God is considering existence. Not even a machshava v'ana emlech, as we learned in the highest levels. It's the divine energy that all its role is to reflect the source. The ayin of the yesh amiti has a very different function. Its function is to lower itself and engage and enter and be mislabish in the worlds. So b'meila, the ayin of the yesh amiti is a form of helam, is in a state of helam, I should say. How is that? So the Das Tachton salmus ha'er lislabish be'elmas, to manifest and clothe itself in the worlds. Lahave says yesh ulach yese. to bring the yesh into being, to create the yesh, and to sustain it. That's its energy. Yehi Oyer, Yehi Rakia, the spheres as they relate to existence. So we're not talking about how they are a reflection of the source, of the artist's vision, but rather how it's applying itself to existence. So that's a state of concealment, because that's the only way that existence could be. If that divine energy was completely revealed, you wouldn't have existence. You need a concealment. You need the artist to so-called conceal his deep intentions as he creates each piece of the puzzle, each piece of the art, each component, Chachma, Bina, Das, all the way to this world. Okay. So that's a state of Isalmus. Good. However, in truth, Zeu Gamke Bechinas Hamshacha V'Gili Be'elamis. Okay, I see what he's qualifying here. I'll explain shortly. Let's just read inside. He says the truth is on the other side of the coin. Even though it's concealed in order for existence to emerge, the truth is it's also a revelation. It's also Hamshacha V'Gili Be'elamis. It's also a transmission and a Gili Be'elamis. It's just concealed from us, but to say that it's just concealment, it's not just concealment. It's divine energy that's concealed. So let's explain. If it was completely concealed fundamentally, then nothing would exist altogether. You could say it's the Ur Eliki that's not revealed to us, but is definitely manifesting in creation. In other words, when the Eibishter says Yehi Ur, we see light. When he says Yehi Raki, you see a firmament. The only thing is you don't see the Elikus in it. You just see the product of the Elikus. So to say that it's just a salmos, concealment, then you wouldn't have a Ur, you wouldn't have Rakia, you wouldn't have a human being. So he's saying it's a Gili, but it's a Gili that's not focusing on the Gili part of the Elikus, but it's focusing on the product. So to say that the artist is painting details and it's only concealment, no, there are details emerging. You could only say the details are prominent and you don't see the whole divine energy within it. But to say it's not concealment, no, that's what he's saying here. It's interesting. You don't really see this so often in Maimonides, but it's a very interesting point. That's why it's called Elikim. It's still a name of God. It's just a name of God that is channeling it into the created existence. So he says, because without it, they wouldn't exist, and they wouldn't have in them Hamshachas Eliki, which I think he means two things. The Hamshachas Eliki that creates them, and the Hamshachas Eliki that we're capable through Avodah to reveal. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to remain just a creation. When we do Avodah Hashem, and we reveal Elikus, like through Das, we reveal it into the world, what are we revealing? We're revealing it into Elikim. So to say that Elikim is just concealment, period, no. It's a tzimtzum that leads, first of all, creation of existence and Hamshachas Elikus into existence. Again, I think Hamshachas Eliki can be interpreted as Hamshachas Eliki to create. So and Hamshachas Eliki that comes when we do Avodah. We are revealing the Elikus in Oyer and in Rakia and in any other part of creation. Now it goes on. And it's through the concealment. Now he's going back and forth to explain. So what is the role of the concealment? Through the concealment of the divine energy. That's what's necessary. The concealment is necessary for them to create, to bring into being their existence. So what he's adding here is that the Salmus itself is also a form of Gili. Because true Salmus, it wouldn't apply itself altogether. There'd be no creation. If God completely did not allow any energy to flow, you'd have nothing. So even though it's Elikim, and it's a state of concealment, that concealment itself is what creates existence, and in it is Mislabish Eid Eliki. Here it seems to mean that it's not the Hamshachah through Avodah, but through the creation. In other words, there's an Eid Eliki in every part of existence. The only thing is, it's through concealment, but it's still a Gili. It's a Gili b'derech Salmus, you could say. It would be something like saying, when a teacher in his own brilliance is Havaya. But the teacher is teaching a student in a very minimal way, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Just teaching us. So on one hand, it's a psalmist. It's concealing the real power and the whole intensity and brilliance behind these letters, behind this small idea. So it's a psalmist. But to say that it's not a gili, it is a gili. It's a gili b'derech psalmist. The psalmist is necessary in order for the student to receive it. So compared to Havaya, the full undiluted and not subject to tzimtzum gili, it's not. That's Havaya. The shemesh, that's the sunlight itself. So Elikim is also a gili, but it's a gili that is commensurate and relates to existence. So it's concealed in that sense, but the concealment creates. So it's also a creative force. It's just a force that is in a state of concealment. Okay.
Like the malacha of Seiser and Meichek. It's
you mean?
Yeah, it's part of the process. Part of the process of construction is destroying what you have before. If you don't destroy what you have before,
I think he's saying, I think that's correct, but I don't think he's saying that here. He's not saying it's concealment in order to reveal. He's saying the concealment itself is creating something. So
concealment itself is a revelation. I think the concealment itself is a revelation.
Okay, I think when I say some naslims would be the tzimtzum itself is b'shvil hagili. Here it sounds like that it's more that it itself is gili.
Part of the process of gili.
I wouldn't use that here per se, because seiser usually refers to something the opposite, but then you come to say that the opposite is also there to bring. It works in general, but I don't know if here would be the best way to explain it here, but fine. Okay. The
tzimtzum is the gilui.
But he doesn't use the word tzimtzum here, just for the record. I use the word tzimtzum. He says here, Elikim, remember, Shem Elikim is a gilui, or in Tanya he says Shem Elikim is the midas ha-tzimtzum, midas ha-gvura. Gvura, hein gvuresov. That's the words in Tanya. So, yes, if you talk about the pure helam of it, you can use the word the helam b'shvil hagili. Here, he's not really saying it that way. He's saying here more that it's in a form of isalmus, but it's really a gili because it's creating. If you want to dissect it, you could further dissect it. It is, at the end of the day, it is tzimtzum b'shvil hagili, but I'm just saying he doesn't use the exact words like that. That's all. He's saying here it's more unique. I have not seen these words very often, where he says that it's his psalmos, but the psalmos here he wants to point out that the point is that it is ultimately a creative force, and it brings things into being, and there's a Eireliki in there. His focus here is not so much with Tzimtzum B'Shvil Gili, but saying that the Elikim, even though it's in a state of Tzimtzum, is a form of Gili. That's all I'm pointing out, the language that he's using here. Again, it doesn't negate the fact that what you're saying about Tzimtzum B'Shvil Gili. It doesn't negate that. Anyway, let's continue. Let's see. There's more to this parenthesis. Okay. The Rebbe Rashab is now adding a yesh leimer, and one can say, Shezeu gam ki mitzad Hergesh. Not sure what he means by that. Let me just read a few lines after. The closer. Okay, this is going to be a little more dense and a little more complicated. I think what he wants to say now, remember we said Das is Hargosha. Hakodev Argosha. So I think the Rebbe Rashab wants to say now that this etzem inyan, that the Eibishter conceals his energy to create, also comes mitzad Hergesh, meaning mitzad das, that Das Tachton. He's explaining what Das Tachton. Why is it Das? Because Das is not just a gili. Das is, remember, is a real internal feeling. So he's going to explain how Das Tachton adds the Ayin of Hergesh here, not just gili. That's what I think he wants to say. I'm not positive because I didn't read it in depth. I just read it quickly. So let's see if that's correct. But I read it because what's this mitzad Hergesh? The first thing you think when you say mitzad Hergesh, it sounds like our Hergesh, Hergesh Adam, that we don't feel the Elokus, or we do feel the Elokus. In other words, the Helam is mitzad us. Mitzad the Eibishter, there's no Helam because he's creating. He's just creating through Elikim. The real concealment is mitzad us. That's the first thing I thought when I saw mitzad Hergesh. That what we just said, Hisalmus, creates, from God's perspective, it's a creator. Why is it different than any force? Yes, it's diminished because the world can't receive it. But the Helam is for us, not for Elikus. But then on the other hand, the Helam is also Elikus does mislabish. So that's when I read further. I think Mitzad Hergesh is going to introduce Das here. But let's read it. And if I didn't get it right, I'll correct myself. And if somebody has a different way of understanding it, fine. But let's read it inside.
You are right. This is what he's saying in the next 3 lines. You are right.
Yeah. I'm just saying, when I saw Hergesh, I right away said, so the Hergesh means Mitzvah unser Hergesh. No. Okay. U'kamoshn is barely ill. Like we learned earlier, was discussed earlier. Dibra maskal acha sha'alti. In the Maimer acha sha'alti, that was like in the Elul Maimorim. So he already referred to acha sha'alti. Last page, where did he refer to acha sha'alti? You remember? Last Maimer? Yeah, on page 1174. Yeah. She says, what did he say in Acha Sha'alti, Maimer? The klolos ha'inyan, the general inyan, the general idea, masha'ola b'ritzeinei, lahaitzel olivre, that it arose in his desire, the Eibishter's desire, God's desire, to emanate and to create, Atzilus Bria, so on. Hu mitzad ha'chesed v'harachmim. There we talked about ki chafetz chesed hu. That why did God create? What was the cause, the driving force? Is God's chesed and rachamim. He wanted to do chesed, love and compassion. And love and compassion drives the energy to reach another. So that's what he said there. Obviously, we know chafetz chesed is not the ultimate reason for creation, but it is a factor. Lifnei tzimtzum chafetz chesed, chesed v'rachmim. Another reason given for creation, he's going to say now in this parentheses, within the parentheses, the gamashi is galash lemes kechesav u'pulesav. The Eitz Chaim says that the reason for creation is in order to reveal the perfection or the completeness of God's faculties and actions, which of course Chassidus says can't be the ultimate reason, because why does God need that? What's the advantage of revealing his faculties? We human beings need to actualize our faculties or else they're not effective. But l'mayla ein keich chaser peil. God's faculty is as if it's an action. So you can't say that's the ultimate, but it is a reason given. In one of the levels, in Eir, the reason given, al pi seichel, is to reveal and actualize, legalis, the faculties, the potential, so to speak. So he says, when that reason is also mitzad chesed, who mitzad hachesed v'arach, who mitzad harachmim ala nevroim. That's also due to his compassion on the creation. In other words, it's not because God needs it, but God wants compassion, so he's revealing himself to another. So basically, he's quoting that Maimer Achash Alti to emphasize that the driving force behind the creation is doing kindness and compassion, chesed and rachamim, which of course is a hergesh, as he's going to say in a second. So when I finished, he's just going back and building a case here. And according to what was explained there in that Maimer Acher Sha'alti, you remember the word Seif Maisa Ola B'Machshava Tchila. So the Rebbe Rashab explained, Seif Maisa is the end of the creation, the end process is what arose and is rooted in Machshava Tchila, and Tchila Samachshava. Meaning in the beginning. In other words, when you see the final product, you see a home, a house, or you see a world. So yes, in the stages, the world came from Asiya, came from Yitzira, Yitzira came from Bria, Bria came from Atzilus. But when you go all the way to the top, where did it all originate? Was God had compassion and chesed and rachamim. He wanted existence like ours here below, this structure of our existence, to experience Elokus. So the root of it, Tchilas HaMachshava, is the Chafetz Chesed, the Chesed, the Rachamim. So the Seif Maisa and the Tchilas HaMachshava are related to one another. According to what it says there, he's saying, Yesh Leima Shezeu HaRachamim Shemitzad HaHergesh. This Rachamim, that's there in Tchilas HaMachshava, is due to Hergesh, Mitzad HaHergesh. Now, we need to understand what this word Hergesh means, because now in the parentheses he says, that's why I said it's complicated a bit. I think there's a lot of Esis Samachshava here, meaning the Rebbe Rashab wrote down the points, but there's a lot left unspoken here, unwritten. So we need a little explanation here, because now he introduces another concept. Rachamim could also come.
We learned that before.
Yeah, of course we learned it before, but still, we learned it before, but bringing it all together here, it adds a whole dimension. So he says, Mitzad Hergesh. What does Hergesh mean? Kav Yachol, Lamaila, there was something that was a conscious, so-called a conscious feeling of Chesed and Rachamim. Because there's another way that you could have Rachamim. Not through a Hergesh, but through the nature, like he says in the parentheses, Loi Mashe Teva Hamarumam Lias Nimshach El HaShafel. Okay, let me explain. Yes, we learned it earlier, quite a while back, actually. We learned it a number of times. So there's a concept that the Rebbe Rashab has spoken about earlier. I have to find where. Do you remember where, Reb Shleima? If you find it, tell me. Anyway.
I think that in Tzadik Dalet it was a Richus Habeyor in different darges in Rachamim.
Yeah. In Tzadik Dalet for sure. Maybe it was Bekitzer and Ayin Beis. There's no question in Ayin Beis there's a whole arichas earlier. I'll look for it. Let me just tell you what it means right now. So there's an element where a person who is an exalted personality, because of his exaltedness, so there's a nature that he's drawn dafke to people of lower of let's call it, I don't want to call it inferior, but on the lowest level of the spectrum. So a melech, for example, a real atzmiz dika melech, he doesn't just hang around with his own type, meaning only elite and those that are like him. He'll go out, as we know, many examples to the shuk, to the market, and maybe even dress himself up in a way that nobody recognizes him. That's not relevant to this. And he'll help people. He'll show rachamim on a shuffle, on people who are poor or peasants or are suffering. So there's something about a merumam that he says here, these words, there's nimshach el hashafel. He's just drawn to a shuffle. The reason for it is because he's above shuffle and gavoya. It's not like he's closer to someone on a higher level. He's so high that he dafka goes to the lowest. It's that's what he explains. But that is mitzad a natural inclination. That's not mitzad a hergesh. That's not because he feels rachmanis on them and therefore actively goes and does something. That's just his nature. He's clearly saying here there's another level of rachamim where you actually feel a type of stimulation. You feel compassion for someone. And that, he says, is the driving force. Now, why he's emphasizing this here and what's the point, I'm not clear at all, to be very honest. I'm just reading it like we're reading it together. We'll hopefully get to clarity, but he's definitely saying...
He's saying
Hold on. Let me just finish. One second.
Because the Hergesh is the Das.
Yeah, that's nice. But how do you know that's not coming from Teva Merumam?
Hergesh is Das.
Hergesh? Okay, let's see. Let me see what he says. Hu mitzad hachesed v'rachum
Teva
gam Hashem.
Merumam is not a Hergesh.
I know that, but that still doesn't prove it. How do you know that that's the case? One second. Let me finish reading it. U'kafi ma shenizbar Hashem shezeh b'chinas tchilas hamachshava yesh leimer shezeh arachim mitzad ha'hergesh. So now he said like this. Okay, so in Acha Sha'alti, he says it comes mitzad chesed and rachmim. Good. And now he's saying, based on that it's tchilas hamachshava, you say this is due to rachmim, due to hergesh. Not the natural inclination of a merumam, of an exalted in personality to be drawn to the lower. V'zehu inyan hadas, shu b'chinas hergesh. Remember, lamato das is clear. You're bringing chachma and bina into an internalized feeling. Here he's saying this level, when the Eibishter is aroused with rachamim in the highest levels, that's a hergesh of das. That's a hergesh of das. And in this case, of course, he's going to say, with the klolos eir hazeh b'chinas Daas Tachton. Yeah, because he's relating to existence. It's not das elyon. So it's the hergesh of das as it relates to existence. U'kamoshn is bar li'il, as we learned earlier. Rak shezehu b'chinas helam eir. However, this is in a state of a concealment of the light. Because that which is drawn from the divine and creation of existence. Let me just read Pshat, and we'll go back to try to understand. I don't fully understand it, to be honest, but let me just read it here. So what draws Elikus and Isavas Elam into each creature, it's only an outer reflection that gets very concealed, to the point that you don't feel at all that this is divine because it's concealed within existence. The only thing you feel life force. You know there's a life force, but you don't know that it's divine. You know there's an energy in Yehi Oyer, Yehi Rakia, but like you have a nefesh inside of you. You know there's a life force, but you don't know what it is. Let me just read to the end of the parentheses. V'gam hagili de'ezeh hu sheba b'slapshus v'salmus. What he said before. In other words, it's not just concealed, but also the gili of this air also manifests in a enclosed and concealed state. The commission is barliil dibra masl b'yem hashmini atzeres. Said in the Maimon b'yem hashmini atzeres. Again, I'm not elaborating. I'm just reading right now. V'aveda sa'adam ali is gili ha'er. And the aveda of the person is to reveal this air that's concealed. Okay, there's a lot of things that need to be unpacked here, to be honest. I need to really think it through and review it. There's the first aspect we understood. The first half of the parentheses was about concealment that's also revealed, so it's a level of gili. But it's okay. The second half of the parentheses is that it comes mitzad chesed v'rachimim, that's hergesh, yesh leimer mitzad hergesh, and that hergesh is also that hergesh. Okay, I think I have some thoughts, but you know what? Let me review it. I'll try to explain this parenthesis tomorrow when I have more clarity. I don't want to just speak without thinking it through a bit more. So at least for me, this parenthesis is not very clear. First half, the yesh leimer, the hergesh part. What he wants to say, I guess he wants to say that in Eibishter and Daas Tachton Elikus, there's a hergesh, just like there's a hergesh by us, by the Adam, there's a hergesh l'mayla. That hergesh brings existence. It comes through concealment. and then we reveal it. And then there's this second parenthesis on top of the page, 1177, about the Gilead Bislapshus from Yom Shmini Atzeres. I need to look at that as well. Okay, you want to, you know what?